The majority of the world, including the United States, recognized the One China policy. In fact, Taiwan figured prominently in 3 joint statements made by the U.S. and China between 1972 and 1982. Known as the Three Communiques, they enshrine a commitment to these key principles. There can only be one China. The People's Republic of China is the sole legal government of China, and the U.S. would continue selling arms to Taiwan at a level consistent with China's militarization of the Taiwan Strait. 40 years on, the United States still abides by the Three Communiques.
They have to decide. They, Taiwan, not us. And we are not encouraging independence. We're encouraging that they do exactly what the Taiwan Act requires. And that's what we're doing. Let them make up their mind, period.
The U.S. position on the One China policy is often misstated, I think intentionally so, in China. The U.S. One China policy does not say that Taiwan is part of China or that China is part of Taiwan. The U.S. One China policy says that the U.S. recognizes that Beijing and Taipei each believe that there is only one China, that the U.S. is neutral on the final settlement, but that the settlement must be peaceful, and that the U.S. will do things to help ensure that. And the U.S.-Taiwan Relations Act of 1979 made that very concrete. The U.S. will take steps to ensure that Taiwan can defend itself against invasion.
In recent months, the U.S. has upset Beijing by sending delegations of high-ranking U.S. officials to Taiwan. Speaker Nancy Pelosi is the latest on a guest list that has attracted the ire of China.
U.S. strategy is more and more clear. They seduce Russia to use of force in the Ukraine. And then they want to seduce Taiwan independence. And then maybe actually let China to use of force to unify Taiwan. China is very cautious. China is very patient. Not let the U.S. strategy be succeeded.
Why does the U.S. keep sending senior officials to Taiwan?
There was an enormous amount of anxiety in Taipei and in other capitals throughout Asia that the Ukraine crisis would either be taken as an excuse by China for greater provocation toward Taiwan, or that it would raise questions about U.S. distraction. That if the U.S., in confronting this really generational upheaval in Europe, would take its eye off the ball yet again in Asia. The U.S. is committed to doing both. That China remains the top competitor, that Russia is a spoiler and has to be dealt with, but that the U.S. remains committed to the resiliency of Taiwan and helping Taiwan deter Chinese aggression.
I can assure you, no U.S. president will send any single American soldier to fight for the independence of Taiwan. Why? Because it will be completely against the fundamental interests of the American people. The American people do not want to see their sons and daughters die for the so-called independence of Taiwan.
U.S. arms sales to Taiwan also angers China.
Condemnation from China over the United States' latest planned arms sale to Taiwan. Beijing has told Washington to immediately revoke the sales plan for the island's missile upgrades. Now, the Chinese say that they will take robust measures to uphold their security interests.
Based on the Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S. is able to provide with Taiwan necessary defensive nature of weapons so that Taiwan can carry enough defense capability to deter aggression of mainland China. This is very important. With this U.S. defense assistance, can Taiwan be more confident in negotiating or interacting with the Beijing authorities? Without these weapons, Taiwan is just like a tiger without teeth, and the Beijing authorities will have so many different means to make Taiwan kowtow to Beijing authorities.
They want to send more weapons to Taiwan. Actually, the Americans will make a lot of money out of arms sale to Taiwan.
My advice to the U.S. on how to manage the Taiwan issue is to let sleeping dogs lie, to allow the status quo to continue as long as possible, because the status quo has kept peace. There are very few predictions I dare to make in geopolitics very confidently. One prediction I make very confidently is that if the government in Taiwan declares that Taiwan no longer represents the Republic of China, but instead is an independent sovereign state, China will declare war. And for all of us who want to prevent wars in this region, let's advise Taiwan to keep to the status quo.
Strategic ambiguity is the thing that allows the U.S. both to help dissuade China from using force, but also not back China into a corner so much that it feels it has no choice but to use force. And so the goal really has to be to continue to buy time indefinitely for facts on the ground to change such that a cross-strait peaceful resolution becomes possible. And it has to remain very clear that there will be terrible repercussions for Beijing should it resort to force. It's not going to spell out exactly what that playbook is.
I don't think the war will happen so long as the Beijing authorities sees some possibilities of peaceful unification with Taiwan. That is why we have seen some rounds of discussions on mainland China about one country, two system, Taiwan formula. At least the Beijing authorities is still trying to find a peaceful way to woo the support of some Taiwan people and trying to make sure that peaceful unification still works.
Both China and the U.S. hope for the Taiwan conflict to be resolved without the use of force. Developments would be closely monitored by the world, especially neighboring countries. Japan and South Korea are now increasing their military budgets as tensions in East Asia increase. As the horrors in Ukraine unfolded, a long taboo topic came up for debate. The issue is whether to allow Japan to introduce a nuclear sharing arrangement to deploy U.S. nuclear weapons on its soil and jointly operate them. Nuclear sharing was established within NATO in the late 1950s. Under the arrangement, Germany and some other non-nuclear NATO states store U.S. nuclear weapons in their territories and maintain their own means of weapons delivery.
I think Japanese politicians watching what's happened with Ukraine has brought home the take-home lesson to some Japanese politicians that nuclear deterrent may be an important way to push back against not only North Korea, which is developing weapons of mass destruction, but also pushing back against what the Japanese understand as assertive Chinese behavior in the East China Sea, South China Sea, and across the Taiwan Straits.
The government of Prime Minister Kishida has taken a stand against the idea, and it's because of this. The horrors of Hiroshima, an atomic bomb city, are still remembered. Though 77 years have passed since the day, the memory has not faded. Yasuhiro Asieda, who's 76, comes early in the morning every year on the date of the anniversary. He was only 11 months old when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on 6 August 1945, flattening the city and killing 140,000 people.
私らもそれ相応の年になりましたんでね。だからあと先は短いし、いうようなことで、平和な世界であれば一番。
Prime Minister Kishida comes from Hiroshima, and the issue of nuclear weapons is a red line he cannot cross. After World War II, peace was prized here. Japan adopted 3 nuclear principles of not possessing, not producing, and not permitting the introduction of nuclear weapons into its territory. But developments in Taiwan are troubling the Japanese. Polls found that 9 in 10 Japanese fear China will invade Taiwan.
Japan's relations with China has been very, very sour for the past more than past 2 decades. And Japan has been facing a serious challenge coming from China in terms of Senkaku Island related issue and also other security related issues. In Japan, there are less than 10% of the people feel affinity toward China, and distrust against China is very deep. On the contrary, Japanese affinity toward Taiwan is really high, more than 80%. And the people-to-people relations are really good. So I think that it is quite natural for the Japanese people to worry about Taiwan contingency.
There's strong security concerns about China in Japan, but in the same polls, Japanese recognize China as the most important economic partner within the region. And $210 billion of Japanese exports went to China last year. And this is despite the COVID-19 pandemic and despite these unfavorable ratings. This economic relationship is something that's very, very difficult to detangle. And I just don't think the Japanese are interested in detangling. Rather, they want to make sure that they can have the benefits, but also be in a position of caution vis-a-vis China on critical issues to Japan's interests, like Taiwan.
Over in China, Japan's actions during World War II continue to color opinions. After a statement by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that a crisis in Taiwan would be an emergency for Japan and for the US-Japan alliance, the Chinese government responded by criticizing various Japanese misdeeds, from its wartime aggression to the decision to release contaminated water from Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean.
近期，日本个别政客接二连三在台湾问题上大放厥词，妄议中国内政，中方对此表示坚决反对。日本历史上发动侵华战争，对台湾进行长达半个世纪的殖民统治，犯下罄竹难书的罪行，对中国人民负有严重历史罪责。日本政客近期频频发表涉台谬论，甚至公然发表违背本国无核三原则，充分暴露出日本国内军国主义势力阴魂不散的危险动向。台湾是中国的事，不关日本的事。
Japan's participation in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad, has also drawn anger from China.
美日印澳拼凑的所谓四边机制，实质上是遏制、围堵中国、维护美国霸权的工具，这是在人为的挑动对立，破坏国际团结与合作。
Then there's the Senkaku, or Diaoyuitao, island disputes. They are currently controlled by Japan, but China also claims sovereignty over the islands.
China's pressure towards Senkaku Islands is still very strong. They send their vessels into the contiguous zones in the Senkaku Islands, and they're staying there all the time. There used to be non-equipped weapons, but now they equip weapons. And Japanese government sent a diplomatic démarche to Beijing every day.